Okay, let's jump right in. For well over a century, football has basically relied on gut instinct, right? The seasoned eyes of scouts, and honestly, a little bit of romanticized luck when building winning teams. It was an era totally defined by the mythos of the genius scout finding a hidden gem on some freezing, muddy pitch. Well, that era is rapidly coming to an end. Today, in this explainer, we are exploring the fascinating academic research and industry breakthroughs that are literally turning the pitch into a giant, quantifiable data set. We're going to look at how math, algorithms, and artificial intelligence are completely revolutionizing the sport. To really understand this shift, we need to contrast the romance of traditional scouting against the cold, hard, scalable efficiency of data analytics. Look, the problem with the traditional eye test isn't that scouts don't know football. The problem is that human beings are fundamentally wired with biases. A scout might suffer from recency bias, meaning they heavily weight a player's last 3 exceptional matches while completely forgetting about a whole season of mediocrity. They might unconsciously favor physically imposing players, or just succumb to fatigue after watching hours and hours of tape. Plus, it's just physically impossible for any human network to watch and perfectly evaluate every player in every league. Data analytics, however, offers absolute objectivity and consistency. It completely strips away the human fatigue and those cognitive biases, allowing a club to evaluate 10,000 players across the globe simultaneously using the exact same rigorous standard. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with beyond the eye test, move into quantifying the pitch, then measuring risk and reward. After that, we'll dive into machine learning in recruitment, and finally wrap up with the future of football. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Beyond the Eye Test and Leaving Tradition Behind. The concept of using statistical models to identify undervalued talent and outsmart wealthier competitors is widely known from baseball's famous Moneyball era, while football is now adopting this exact same philosophy, but executing it requires significantly more complex engineering. See, baseball is essentially a series of isolated static events. A pitch is thrown, a batter swings. Football, on the other hand, is a highly fluid, continuous invasion game. You have 22 players constantly moving, creating and closing off space off the ball in total chaotic transitions. Because the clock never stops and scoring is actually incredibly rare, measuring the true value of a single player's actions in real time is an immense mathematical challenge. You simply cannot just count goals and assists to find a player's worth. You have to find a way to mathematically value the invisible geometry of the game. Which leads us nicely into Section 2. Quantifying the pitch and how we value every single action. The very first major breakthrough in solving this problem was expected threat, or XT, introduced by Karun Singh back in 2018. Expected threat asks us to visualize the pitch as a mathematical value surface grid. Every zone on that grid has a highly specific value assigned to it, based on historical data showing how likely a team is to score from that exact area. Players are then credited for moving the ball from a low-value zone to a high-value zone. Imagine Kevin De Bruyne making what looks like a simple 10-yard horizontal pass. To the naked eye, it might seem totally inconsequential, but if that pass moves the ball from a congested, low-threat zone into a central pocket of space where historical probability dictates a shot is imminent, XT credits De Bruyne heavily for increasing the team's scoring likelihood. It was a revolutionary way to value built-up play. However, it has a blind spot. It only values passes and carries, completely ignoring defensive actions and the contextual pressure a player might be under. But how do we measure beyond just moving the ball from zone to zone? Well, Stats Perform introduced possession value, or PV, in 2019. This model shifted to a really smart, time-based approach, dynamically measuring the probability that a team in possession will score during the next 10 seconds of play. It brilliantly captures the speed and urgency of an attack. But it has a critical flaw. It relies on actual goals scored to train the model. Because football is a notoriously low-scoring sport, training a machine learning model exclusively on actual goals means it is starved for positive data points. This creates a massive class imbalance in the data, which skews the results and dramatically increases variance. Furthermore, it doesn't adequately account for the likelihood of conceding a goal on the counterattack, making risk assessment pretty difficult. And this brings us to on-ball value, or OBV. Introduced by Huddle StatsBomb in 2021, this model brilliantly patches the gaps of its predecessors. First, by training on expected goals, or XG, rather than actual goals, OBV suddenly has tens of thousands of reliable data points to learn from. This smoothed out the wild variance caused by lucky finishes or spectacular saves. But more importantly, OBV incorporates both goals for and goals against components, allowing us to finally measure defensive impact. Consider a scenario where a center back like Virgil van Dijk perfectly intercepts a dangerous through ball right inside his own penalty area. By cutting out that pass, he drastically reduces the opponent's expected goals. OBV calculates that massive reduction in defensive risk and translates it into a high positive value for the defender. Literally every single action, passes, tackles, interceptions, even fouls, is evaluated for its ultimate net benefit to the team. Okay, let's move to section 3, measuring risk and reward, for a bit of a model showdown. When we compare these analytical giants side by side, the rapid paradigm shift in football data over just 3 years becomes totally undeniable. Notice how OBV, by adding defensive metrics and utilizing expected goals instead of actual goals, really established itself as the gold standard for creating an accurate risk-reward profile for players. Think of a highly creative, aggressive attacking midfielder who frequently loses possession. A basic statistical analysis would flag their high turnover rate as a major liability. However, an advanced OBV analysis will objectively weigh those turnovers against the times their high-risk, line-breaking passes actually succeed. If those successful passes generate a massive net benefit in expected goals, the model proves that the player's seemingly reckless style is actually a mathematically optimized approach to winning the match. So the crucial point here is that analysts apply these specific models directly to everyday high-stakes team operations. For player evaluation, management can definitively track if a marquee signing actually added measurable value to the pitch over a 38-game season, filtering out all the media noise and hype. In tactical analysis, coaches use territorial flow models to map precisely which flank an opponent relies on to generate threat, allowing them to adjust their defensive shapes accordingly. For scouting and player recruitment, these models act as a ruthless filter, uncovering obscure players in lower leagues who consistently execute actions that increase the mathematical probability of winning. And in match analysis, video coordinators can break down exactly which sequence of passes yielded the highest on-ball value, translating raw data into actionable training ground drills. Now we're zooming out a bit for section 4, machine learning in recruitment and scaling the data. Processing this unimaginable volume of data requires a seriously sophisticated engineering pipeline, and recent academic research outlines exactly how this is achieved. First, researchers web scrape massive amounts of raw, open-source performance data from platforms like FBref, capturing thousands of matches across the top 5 European leagues. Second, they meticulously clean that data and engineer specific features, isolating crucial performance indicators like progressive passing efficiency and high-pressure duels won. Third, they use k-means clustering. This is an unsupervised machine learning algorithm that basically just hunts for hidden patterns, grouping players purely based on their statistical similarities rather than any preconceived human labels. Finally, the categorized data is fed into classification algorithms to perfectly map the global talent pool. Now, you might be asking, why is this rigorous pipeline necessary? Because traditional predefined playing positions are just far too rigid for the modern game. Labeling a player simply as a midfielder fails entirely to capture their true performance diversity. Data-driven performance clusters, however, reveal a player's actual workload and behavioral tendencies on the pitch. This is where you uncover those invaluable hybrid roles that traditional scouting completely misses. For example, a scout might recommend a player they view as a traditional touchline-hugging winger, but the clustering algorithm might reveal that the player's underlying data perfectly matches the profile of an inverted playmaker. Mislabeling a player in a traditional system leads to poor tactical fits on the pitch, but data clustering ensures you know exactly the type of weapon you are integrating into your squad. The stakes for getting this right are absolutely astronomical. We are talking about billions of euros here. European clubs collectively spend billions annually in the transfer market, making recruitment the single highest point of financial risk for any organization. The uncertainty surrounding how a foreign player will adapt to a new tactical system, a new pace of play, and a new manager makes every single transfer a massive gamble. If a club is preparing to spend 50 million euros on one player, they literally cannot afford a flop. A scout's assurance that a player simply passed the eye test is no longer sufficient risk management. Deploying these machine learning frameworks acts as the ultimate insurance policy, providing mathematical proof that a player's specific, clustered play style maps perfectly onto the team's exact tactical requirements. As we enter our final section, let's look at Section 5, the future of football and objective talent discovery. The academic research confirms that when testing various machine learning models to predict a player's true positional role based on stats, ensemble algorithms like random forest and the voting classifier emerge as the absolute best in class. They vastly outperform single baseline models like simple decision trees or logistic regression. To put that in a perspective, think of a single baseline model like asking one isolated scout for their opinion. It's a good data point, but highly susceptible to error. An ensemble algorithm, however, is like asking a stadium full of thousands of independent analysts to simultaneously evaluate a player and then taking the majority vote. By combining multiple decision trees, these models drastically reduce the margin of error, filtering out all the noise to provide the strongest, most reliable predictions in the sport. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder as the data-driven revolution of football continues to unfold. As machine learning brings perfect, cold objectivity to the pitch, will the subjective eye of the scout become completely obsolete? Will it be replaced entirely by expected threat grids and random forest algorithms? Or, as the data handles all the heavy lifting of objective filtering, will the human element, the ability to sit in a living room and assess a player's character, their leadership, resilience, and psychological drive, become more valuable than ever before? It is a fascinating question, and watching how clubs balance the precision of the algorithm with the intuition of the human touch will absolutely define the next decade of the beautiful game. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the data behind the sports you love.